Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin by acknowledging something real, that life isn't always easy. We face obstacles, setbacks, and seasons where it feels like our prayers aren't being answered. But let me remind you of one thing: God has a plan, and it's greater than anything you can imagine. I'm here today to encourage you to let God lead you to your miracle. There are moments in life when we stand at the edge of something we can't quite grasp. We look around and wonder, where is the breakthrough? When will my situation change? But here's the thing: your miracle is not defined by a moment of sudden change. It's the culmination of faith, obedience, and trust in a God who is working behind the scenes. Do you know that a miracle doesn't always look like we expect it? Sometimes miracles aren't grand gestures. Sometimes they're quiet shifts in your spirit, or the unexpected peace that passes understanding when you feel overwhelmed. Don't discount the little signs that God is moving in your life. To truly receive the miracle you've been waiting for, you must surrender control. That's a hard pill to swallow, isn't it? We live in a world that pushes us to make things happen on our own, to fight for everything we want. But there's something powerful that happens when you let go. When you stop trying to control everything and give God permission to lead. When you step back and say, God, I trust you. I'm ready to follow your plan, no matter how it looks. I know that surrendering doesn't mean things will always make sense. But here's the beauty of God's leadership: He sees the whole picture. And if you're honest, you'll admit there are moments when you didn't know what was next, but God did something so much greater than you could have imagined. We have to trust God's timing over our own. We get caught up in the idea of now because we live in a fast-paced world where everything is instant. But let me remind you that God's timing is never late. It's always perfect. Just because you don't see the miracle today doesn't mean it's not already on its way. Sometimes God is refining us, preparing us, and making sure that when the miracle arrives, we are ready to handle it. And yes, there will be moments of doubt. Moments when you question if you're hearing Him right, or if the path He's leading you on is the right one. It's okay to have those doubts. What matters is what you do with them. Do you keep pressing forward even when it's hard? Do you keep believing even when you don't see? God never promised us that the road would be smooth, but He did promise He'd never leave us. That's where faith comes in. Faith is the belief in things hoped for, the confidence in things unseen. It's easy to believe in what's in front of us. The miracle is in believing in what's ahead, even when we can't see it yet. Faith doesn't mean you have all the answers. It means you trust God, even when the pieces aren't fitting together. But here's the kicker: faith without action is dead. God doesn't just want us to sit and wait passively. He wants us to move in obedience. He wants us to act like we believe in His promises. Sometimes that means taking a step even when you can't see the full path. Sometimes it means walking in faith and trusting that God will guide each step. I want to leave you with this: your miracle isn't just about what God will do for you. It's about what He's already doing through you. He's shaping you, strengthening you, preparing you for something greater. And when you let Him lead you, when you surrender, trust, and walk in faith, you will see miracles unfold in your life in ways you never imagined. So family, let God lead you. Your miracle is not just coming, it's already on its way. Keep trusting, keep believing, and keep walking. The best is yet to come. We all find ourselves in moments where life seems to be moving faster than we can keep up, or slower than we'd like it to. Maybe you're here today and you're carrying a weight that feels too heavy, or you're standing at the crossroads of a decision that could change everything. You've prayed, you've hoped, you've worked hard, but still it feels like the miracle you've been waiting for is just out of reach. I want to speak directly to that place in your heart, that space where the future feels uncertain and the journey ahead is unclear. It's in those moments that we are called to trust. We are called to trust in divine guidance, to trust that God sees what we cannot see, that His timing is perfect and His ways are higher than our own. You might not have all the answers right now, and the path before you may look uncertain, but there is a quiet assurance that when we surrender our plans, when we open our hearts and our minds to God's leading, He will take us to places we could never reach on our own. Trusting in divine guidance doesn't mean the road will be free of challenges. It doesn't mean the waiting will be easy or that you won't experience pain along the way. But it means that no matter what comes your way, there is a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace that assures you that you are never walking this journey alone. You don't have to know the full picture right now because God knows it all. He's not just walking beside you, He's holding your hand, leading you, whispering words of comfort when the road gets tough. Today, I want to remind you that you don't have to figure everything out on your own. Let God take the lead. Even when the answers seem unclear, even when doubt creeps in, let Him guide you. Trust that where He's taking you is greater than where you've been. The miracle you're waiting for is not just about the destination, it's about the journey of learning to lean into His wisdom, to trust in His timing, and to believe that His plan for you is unfolding exactly as it should. There are moments in life when we stand at the edge of something uncertain. Maybe you're in one of those moments right now, looking around and wondering, where is the change I've been praying for? Maybe it's a situation you've been battling with for so long that you're starting to wonder if you'll ever see a breakthrough. I know that feeling. When hope feels fragile and the weight of your struggles feels heavy, but it's in those moments that we need to stop and recognize the very real need for a miracle in our lives. We all reach a point where our own strength is no longer enough, where the resources we have can't solve the problem, where our wisdom doesn't provide the answers. That's when we realize a miracle is what we need. But a miracle doesn't always come wrapped in a bow. We often think miracles are these grand, instant changes, the kind we can point to and say, that's it, that's the moment everything turned around. And yes, sometimes it happens that way, but more often than not, miracles are quiet. Subtle shifts that happen in our hearts before they ever manifest in our circumstances. It's the peace that rises in your spirit when you've been anxious for days. It's the strength you find to forgive when you thought you couldn't let go. It's the new sense of direction in your life when you've been walking in circles for years. Recognizing the need for a miracle doesn't mean waiting for something dramatic to happen. It means acknowledging that we are in need of divine intervention, of God stepping into the places where our own abilities fall short. It means recognizing that there are parts of our lives where we need God to move, whether it's in relationships that are broken, dreams that feel impossible, or hearts that have been wounded by life. It's about coming to the point where we realize that we can't fix everything on our own. And when we open our hearts to the possibility of miracles, we create space for God to work in ways that we could never orchestrate ourselves. When we recognize the need for a miracle, it's an act of faith. It's saying, I believe that God can do what I cannot. I believe He has the power to turn things around, to heal what's broken, to restore what's lost, and to bring hope where there is none. It's in that moment of surrender, that moment of acknowledging our own limitations, that God's power can begin to move. The miracle isn't always in what we can see with our eyes. It's in the transformation of our hearts and the quiet strength that rises up in us when we've placed our trust in the one who can do the impossible. So if you're standing here today waiting for a miracle, know that it's okay to admit the need. It's okay to say, I can't do this. There's something powerful that happens when we come to the end of ourselves, when we reach a place where we realize that no matter how hard we can't control everything. We try to hold on to fix things, to make them work, but the harder we grip, the more we feel the weight of the burden. It's in those moments of struggle that God invites us to surrender, to let go of the control we cling to and trust Him with what we cannot handle on our own. And that, my friends, is where the true power lies in surrender. Surrender doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean giving up or admitting defeat. No, surrender is the boldest declaration of faith. It's saying, God, I've done everything I know to do, but now I trust you to take this from here. It's a posture of the heart that allows God to step in and do what we could never do. Surrendering control means acknowledging that God's ways are higher than ours, and His plan is far greater than anything we could orchestrate on our own. It's choosing to release our need to know all the answers and instead choosing to trust that God knows exactly what He's doing, even when we can't see the full picture. When we surrender, we're not giving up on our dreams. We're not saying, God, I don't believe in what you've promised. Instead, we're making space for His plan to unfold in a way that is greater than anything we could have imagined. Because when we hold on too tightly, we limit God's ability to work in our lives. We try to fit Him into our plans and then wonder why things don't go the way we expected. But when we let go, when we take our hands off and trust God's timing, that's when the miracles begin to happen. It's easy to surrender when everything's going well, when life is smooth and we feel in control. It's natural to say, God, I trust you, but it's in the hardest moments, the moments when we feel most vulnerable, most uncertain, that true surrender is tested. It's when we feel like we're losing everything that we're faced with the choice, will we keep trying to hold on or will we let God take over? Surrender requires a kind of humility. It requires us to admit that we don't have all the answers and that we are not in charge of every outcome. But the beauty of surrender is that it invites God to take what we thought was broken and make it whole again. It allows Him to take what we thought was impossible and turn it into a testimony of His faithfulness. When we surrender, we stop fighting against the flow of God's purpose for our lives and we start flowing with it. Surrender is also an act of trust. It's easy to surrender when we trust someone completely, but trusting God in the midst of uncertainty takes courage. It takes faith too. We live in a world that moves fast, a world where everything is expected to happen instantly. We live with a constant pressure to make things happen on our own timetable, to achieve our dreams and fix our problems in our own way and on our own schedule. But here's the truth that we all need to hear today: God's timing is not the same as our timing. And that's a beautiful thing. Because while we are rushing and trying to make things fit into the box we've created, God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail of our lives with perfect precision. Trusting God's timing is not always easy. In fact, sometimes it feels downright frustrating. We pray, we wait, and nothing seems to change. The breakthrough we've been hoping for feels distant. The doors we've been knocking on remain closed. And in those moments, it's so tempting to take matters into our own hands, to force things to happen because we believe that if we don't, nothing will change. But here's the truth: we must embrace God's timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't make sense to us. God doesn't operate on our timeline. While we're looking at the clock, God is looking at the bigger picture. He's not just concerned with the moment we're in, He's concerned with the person we're becoming, the lessons we're learning, and the strength we're gaining as we wait. There are things God wants to do in us before He can do things for us, and those things can't be rushed. If we are so focused on the clock, so fixated on when our miracle will come, we miss the opportunities for growth that are happening in the waiting. Waiting on God's timing means embracing the idea that He is always working, even when we don't see it. When you're in that season of waiting, you may feel like you're standing still, but God is moving all around you. He is working in ways you can't yet see. He is aligning things behind the scenes, shifting people and circumstances, and preparing you for the blessing that's coming your way. And sometimes the waiting isn't about us being ready, it's about the world around us being ready for what God is about to do. But trust me, I know how hard it is to wait. We all want things to happen now. We want our prayers answered yesterday, and we want our dreams realized today. But trusting God's timing requires patience to know that what He has for us is worth the wait. It requires faith that even when it feels like nothing is happening, God is still moving. It requires the strength to keep walking, keep believing, and keep trusting, even when we can't see the destination yet. And here's the thing, God is not just concerned with the miracle He wants to give you. He is concerned with the heart He is shaping in you as you wait. If we get everything we want right when we want it, we miss out on the transformation that God wants to do in us. We might be praying for something, but God knows that there is something more important. There are times in life when we find ourselves walking in the dark, uncertain of what's ahead, and we face moments where the path is unclear, where the questions seem to outnumber the answers, and where the doubts begin to creep in, whispering things like, what if this isn't the right decision? Or what if this dream will never come to pass? It's in those moments when the weight of uncertainty presses down on us that our faith is truly tested. But let me remind you of something powerful. It's okay to feel uncertain. It's okay to have doubts. In fact, it's in the midst of uncertainty that we often discover just how strong our faith can be. Uncertainty is not a sign of failure, it's simply a part of the journey. It's easy to trust when everything is clear, when the road ahead is straight and well lit. But faith is truly tested when we can't see where we're going, when the way forward seems like a blur. In those times when the future feels foggy, we are faced with a choice. Will we continue to move forward in trust, or will we let the doubts paralyze us? Will we believe that God is still with us, even when the path ahead seems uncertain? Here's the thing about uncertainty. It doesn't mean God is absent. It doesn't mean He's forgotten about you or that His promises aren't true. In fact, uncertainty can often be a sign that God is calling you into a deeper level of trust. He's asking you to step out even when the road ahead isn't clear. He's asking you to keep walking even when you don't know exactly where you're going. And here's the beauty of it. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to know how it's all going to work out. What you need is the courage to take the next step, even when you can't see the whole staircase. Doubt too is something we all face. The fear that maybe this time things won't work out, or the wondering if we're hearing God right. It's natural to doubt, especially when things aren't happening the way we expected them to. But I want you to hear, this doubt is not the enemy of faith. It's simply part of the journey. It's what we do with that doubt that matters. Do we let it pull us away from God, or do we bring our doubts to Him, allowing them to deepen our trust? God is not afraid of our doubts. He knows our hearts, and He's big enough to handle our questions. In fact, when we bring our uncertainty to Him, He doesn't condemn us for it. He meets us where we are and gives us the strength to keep going. Sometimes when we are surrounded by doubt and uncertainty, it feels like we're walking alone. But I want to remind you that you are never alone. Even when you can't feel His presence, God is with you. He is guiding you even when you can't see the way. He is working in the unseen, weaving together the threads of your life in ways you cannot yet comprehend. The doubt you feel doesn't make you any less loved or any less chosen. In fact, it is in these moments that God is shaping your character, strengthening your faith, and preparing you for the next season of your life. Navigating uncertainty and doubt is not about having all the answers or seeing the full picture. It's about holding on to the truth that God is faithful even when we can't trace his hand. It's about continuing to walk step by step, trusting that he will guide you through the fog. Faith is one of the most powerful forces in the world, yet it is also one of the hardest to fully grasp. It's easy to have faith when everything is going well, when you can see the result of your hard work, or when the path ahead seems clear. But faith isn't about what we can see, it's about believing in what we cannot see. It's about trusting in what we know deep in our hearts, even when the circumstances around us seem to tell a different story. True faith goes beyond the surface level of believing and requires a deep-rooted confidence in God's ability to work in ways we can't always understand. Faith doesn't need to have all the answers. It simply requires the courage to move forward even when the way isn't clear. It's saying, I trust you, God, even when I don't know how this is going to turn out. Faith is not about certainty in the outcome, but certainty in the one who holds our future in his hands. Think about it for a moment. Every miracle begins with a seed of faith planted in the heart before it is ever seen in the natural world. When God speaks to you, he speaks to your spirit, to the part of you that believes in the impossible. He calls you to step out, to believe in something bigger than yourself, to move forward without knowing every detail of the plan. And yet, even without seeing the result, you have to hold on to the assurance that what he has promised will come to pass. Faith is believing in the things you cannot see because you trust the one who sees it all. It's believing that the promises God has made are true, even when the world around you is telling you to doubt. Faith means looking at the situation you're in and choosing to believe that God has a greater purpose, even if you can't see it yet. It means trusting that the dream he has planted in your heart is not too big, not too far out of reach, no matter how impossible it seems right now. When we walk by faith, we're walking by a different set of eyes, God's eyes. We're looking at life not through the lens of our circumstances, but through the lens of his promises. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing how you're going to make it across, but still trusting that God will provide the way. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains, that shifts the atmosphere, that opens doors where none seem to exist. Faith requires us to believe in what we cannot see, but it also requires us to act on that belief. It's one thing to say we believe, but it's something entirely different to live out that belief in the face of uncertainty. Faith calls us to move forward when the world tells us to stay still, to speak hope when everything around us feels hopeless. It's stepping out of our comfort zones, taking that leap of faith, and trusting that God will catch us. What faith does is simple. It transforms us. It moves us from a place of limitation to a place of possibility. When we choose to walk by faith, we are choosing to believe that God is bigger than the challenges we face, stronger than the doubts that try to creep in, and more powerful than the obstacles that stand in our way. Faith doesn't just change what happens around us, it changes who we are. It teaches us patience, resilience, and trust. It grows our capacity to endure, to hope, and to persevere. Faith, at its core, is a belief that what we see in front of us is not the final story. The story isn't over yet. The journey may not be easy, but with faith, we know that every step we take is one step closer to seeing God's plan unfold. It's about believing that the God who brought you this far has not brought you this far to leave you. It's about knowing deep in your soul that even when you cannot see the end of the road, God is already there waiting for you. Obedience and action go hand in hand when it comes to stepping out in faith. It's one thing to believe, it's another thing to actually act on that belief. You see, faith isn't just a feeling or a thought in our hearts. Faith requires movement. It requires us to take the steps God is calling us to take, even when we don't see how it will all unfold. It's easy to talk about faith, to sing about faith, and to think about faith. But faith only becomes real when we step out and act on it, when we show God that we trust His direction enough to move forward, even when the road ahead seems unclear. Obedience means aligning our actions with God's will, even when it's uncomfortable or when we don't fully understand the why behind it. When God calls us to move, He's asking for our obedience. And obedience is not always easy. It's not always convenient. It might even challenge everything you've known or planned. But I want you to remember this: when God asks you to take action, He's not just testing your willingness, He's preparing you for something greater. He's positioning you to receive a blessing that you wouldn't have been able to receive without that step of obedience. Stepping out in faith means trusting that God's plan is better than our own, even when we can't see the full picture. It's knowing that God's ways are higher than our ways and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. When God asks you to step into the unknown, He's asking you to trust Him with the journey, to believe that the very act of moving will unlock doors that you couldn't have opened on your own. And though it may feel like a risk, know that God doesn't lead us down paths to harm us. His plan is always for our good, even when we can't see the fruits of that plan right away. But here's the thing: obedience without action is incomplete. God doesn't just want us to say, "I trust you." He wants us to show Him we trust Him. And the way we show Him is by doing what He says, even when it feels risky, even when the world tells us we're crazy for taking that step. It's about saying yes to the call, even when the steps ahead feel uncertain. It's about taking that leap of faith, trusting that He'll be there to catch us. When we step out in faith, there's often a moment of discomfort, a moment when everything in us says stay where it's safe. But true faith doesn't leave us in our comfort zones. It calls us to stretch, to grow, to trust God beyond what feels comfortable and familiar. It requires us to make the choice to act in obedience, even when our fear wants to hold us back. The moment you choose to step out is the moment you make room for God to do the miraculous in your life. And listen, your action may not always look like what you expected. Sometimes we wait for a big dramatic moment like a clear sign or an open door before we take that step. But faith is often about obedience in the small, everyday things, about trusting God with the little decisions that in time lead to bigger breakthroughs. It's about being obedient in the moments that don't seem significant, knowing that those moments of faith build up over time to something that can move mountains. God is calling you to act. He's calling you to take the step, to follow the leading of His Spirit, even when the outcome is uncertain. He's calling you to trust that He's already there in the future, waiting to meet you on the other side of your obedience.